We're live. It's always a thrilling moment. We're here, we're live. Welcome to fashion drawing class. This may be your first class, maybe you've done a lot of this. If you're like me, and no matter how many times I've studied this, for how many years, how many times I've done it, I'm always thrilled, A, to teach it. B, I'm always thrilled to see someone else teach it because everybody has different insights, different approaches. Figure drawing is amazing, whether you apply it to fashion design, which is going to be the core of how I address all this, but whether it's from a fine art perspective, if it's for pure pleasure, fun, whether it's for your fashion career, your fashion portfolio, costume design, illustration, there's so much in this world of figure drawing, and it's very close to my heart. I'm Laura Volpintesta, and Fashion Illustration Tribe is my online fashion school. This is a free program that I'll be doing from time to time so you can get to know me and my teaching style. It's my first time with Google Hangouts, and I'm excited because we have this chat feature. So you're able to ask me questions on the air. You're able to chime in if something's not clear, if you have an extra question you want to answer. Um, that light just went off in the middle of the video. I'm going to take a moment since nobody came back on. Okay. So um, model drawing, when I was a child, I used to always look at pictures of ballerinas. You know how it is at that early age when little girls get into the ballerina thing. I remember how I just used to notice, just in the photos, if their hand was just turned this way or that way, or if their foot was just pointed this way or that way, how every one of those expressions said so much. It wasn't just a posture. So I think that followed through all the years of my life until I became, in around high school age, obsessed with fashion magazines and the beauty of the images in there. I never had a problem with them then. Now I'm a little more rebellious about fashion magazines, but there's a good part to them too. At the time when I was in high school, what I always felt was that fashion media and fashion magazines were so powerful. It's like whatever you saw in there was so beautiful and so seductive that you could really use image making in fashion to educate the world, to promote positive change, to promote diversity, to promote health, to promote so many things, because in the hands of a skilled designer and photographer working from the heart, you can create images that really make a difference. By the time I got through school, I noticed that I kind of lost touch with that. It was much more practical in my concerns. Get a job, things like that. It was much, I became disconnected from my original mission. I have a grandmother, not anymore. My grandmother who passed, but she wrote me a letter when she was like 90. She was in the fashion industry. And at the time, I laughed to hear her say this, but she's like, when I graduated from Parsons, she said, start your own school. Change fashion from the inside out. Charge less than the universities and do it yourself. And it's so funny because that's what I find myself doing here today. Um, it's exciting. I've been teaching fashion design since 1997. I finished fashion design school in 1995 and had a few full-time jobs, Old Navy, few places. Wasn't so thrilled with the work combined with the schedule. But then I was quickly invited to teach at Parsons, and the teaching, I started by teaching pattern making, then draping and sewing. And about 5 years in, I started with the model drawing. And wow, model drawing, illustration, and design. And there I just lit up because model drawing was a life something I always loved. Something so powerful, something so beautiful. There's a story in every shape, every bend, every human, and I love bringing that to life. And the joy that I experience when I do that, I want to bring that joy to your experience. And then what happens is in a class like this, we get a little interactive because you can chat you can send questions to me online. In my online course, what happens is you get lots of videos, and then you're able to scan your assignments in and ask questions, and you get constant feedback from me in the classroom. And from your peers, and that is a party. And that's what I want this to be. I want this to be a party. You know, you're getting real skills, but you're also really connecting with people in a meaningful way. And in saying that, I think I just answered my own question. I took out two figures today to discuss with you guys. You can see here, one, two, and two very different models. And I don't judge one over the other. I just want you to know that the skills that I teach you, first of all, that I embrace all body types and also maternity and all these different size ranges. That's what I want to teach you, to understand the figure in such a way that you can go beyond and actually build any figure you want, because you have such a solid knowledge of the process and the elements. So you can build your own body. You can build a children's body, a men's body. I can give you guidelines for that, but really you're going to get guidelines right here that enable you to analyze and reproduce a body. Certainly, in the first setting, you may be overwhelmed and feel that you haven't, caught it. But it's definitely a process, and it's a live process. So the best thing you can do is jump in and go. And I was saying I answered my own question. What I answered was I was trying to choose which body to work with tonight, and I've decided I'm going to work with this one because something I was saying was bringing me to it. Now I forgot. Just going to work with the fuller figure, because with fashion it seems that, if anything, people are always going, I don't mind a thin model. There's plenty of thin people. But to actually take the legs of a fashion model and stretch them so far beyond any kind of human reality is maybe a quick way to get drama on the page. But as far as true design goes, you cannot translate a garment like that into a finished garment. If you have a model with 10-foot-long legs compared to a small body, which I see all the time, and you design a dress or a skirt on that looks good, try translating that into reality on my mannequin's actually around the corner, but you can barely see it. Try translating that to the mannequin, and you're really going to be struggling. You're actually going to end up with a whole different dress by the time you've recreated that on a regular body. So why not? Don't you see beautiful people every day? Don't you? Real fashion looks. Don't you feel good when you see yourself represented in fashion? Doesn't it feel good to celebrate women and our lives and our bodies once and for all? I just found that each year that progressed, I could less and less relate to the women in these magazines. And why not an inclusive fashion? So let's get to the meat and potatoes. I'm going to get into demonstrating. Just one of my lights went off as soon as I got here, so I'm going to put that light back on so you get a better clarity for you. Don't go anywhere. See how that's going. Everything back up and running? Okay, that's more like it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring this figure over here, and I'm going to move my camera as well. So you'll be hearing me more than seeing me, and let's get to the techniques. What I'm going to introduce you to is, I'm going to take this figure, put it here, but I'm not going to be working at the same size as what you see. I'm going to work larger, and I'm using this very large paper because I know that you really need to be able to see. And if I'm working with a little piece of paper, you're not going to be able to see. In my online course, I work from all different angles on different weeks. So this is just one of the angles that you would see. This is the demonstration I did yesterday. I had scheduled this event and had to reschedule it, so I went ahead and did it just in case people showed up, and it was a little bit of a scheduling fiasco because Google Hangouts are a little bit challenging to get the hang of. So we're all students in something, right? So that's one of the things I'm student in right now. I've been teaching this forever, but I'm new at all of this internet marketing, technology, etc., etc. So here we go. I'm going to start by looking at my model. Make sure when you're choosing, there's a whole bunch of special things you should really pay attention to when you're choosing images. Make sure that the images you choose are head to toe, not cut off at the top or cut off at the leg. When you're starting, you need to see that body. And that's why I'm using a bikini and not a gown. We'll get to the gowns. We'll get to the gowns, I promise. But I think understanding what's inside the clothes is essential from my philosophy. Okay, so you have a head-to-toe pose. She also shouldn't be leaning on anything. So she's leaning on the wall or leaning on a bench or something. That will throw off the balance, and balance is a big deal. So I'd like you to look for images that are not leaning on anything either. And this is what I call an action pose, which means she's not standing straight and still. You can see that her shoulders are tilted one way and her hips are tilted the opposite way, and that's what I call movement. I also call it opposition. You'll hear me say these things because her upper body and her lower body aren't parallel to each other there. They're taking on angles, and they're like opposite angles. Okay. Now I'm going to start by feeling out the page. I'm kind of going to feel for the top and feel for the bottom. You're going to notice that I'm working in a rough, what you may consider sloppy way, and that's because I want you to learn to build a body first. We're not going to go for some finished, slick little jumble of lines that look so elegant but don't have an understanding behind them. Here I'm really going to give you an understanding of how to build the body first. Trust me that this goes to where you want to go. But first we're going to start by building her as if she was made out of clay on the paper. So we're going to fill her in with gray tone and really see her as a shape, a silhouette. So what happens, I'm feeling out the page just so that I'm actually moving into the space, moving into my drawing, basically. Okay, creating the energy of the space. And I'm actually going to start by sketching out a pure vertical too. Let me talk to you about my pencil. This is a woodless graphite pencil, no wood. That means that I can draw on the side without scratching the paper, without leaving dents, and without having to sharpen constantly. It also means that when I use the side of the pencil, instead of getting lines, I'm more likely to get shapes or areas. And a big part of my process is to get you started looking at shapes. I mean, isn't fashion so full of shape, silhouette, proportion? So working with shapes is essential, and that's not just lines. I'm going to talk to you a little bit later too about what is a line. It's very philosophical. Okay, but here's my pure vertical. Now that's an imaginary line, pure vertical. But if I was looking at my photograph, that pure vertical is parallel to the edge of the page, right? And I can kind of sense that with my eyes. And then I can use my eyes to notice. Have you ever heard of an arabesque or an S-curve? Look at your image and you're going to find an S-curve. Now there's no right or wrong answer about where the S-curve is. So let's say I feel it this way. I feel this moving into this leg and back. That's an S feeling. Now likewise, someone else might say, look at this line coming to this one. Okay. It's actually an S going. There's different ways to see it. So there's no right or wrong. The thing is that you want to feel something that moves, and you may want to work quickly. My first drawing class I ever took, the teacher had a model, and the model would change poses like every 5 seconds. And all we could do was capture the pose's essence. They call it a gesture, by drawing as quickly as possible and capturing the quickest movement, the overall shape. So, and even if it was, let's say, 15 seconds, you'd get something like, and then the pose would be over, and that would be it. But guess what? That sort of pressure and speed. It really does make you get the essence. And that's why in my courses, you'll see that I limit how long you work on a drawing. So you're constantly getting the essence of a pose and not spending a long, long time losing the energy and getting a pose that looks very stiff and labored. So start by feeling out this movement. And then I do want to know, where does the upper body, which is solid, end, and the lower body, which is separated into two legs, where does that begin? Well, in real life, it'll be about halfway down the body, so I can measure that out with my fingers. What's halfway down this drawing? It's right here. Okay. Some people will use a rule where they say it's just above the halfway point, but every time you do that, those legs are getting longer and longer. So, halfway up or slightly more, but keep it real. Keep it real, because then whatever you draw in all of its gorgeousness will translate just as well to a beautiful woman who's going to wear those clothes, right? Okay. So now we have a sense of the movement. We know where the crotch is, or the hip level, or the place where the single body turns into the split body, which is the legs. Now what we have here is, I always tell my students to look into your own body. Okay, so you've got, I think it's going to be too close, but if you go and you start touching, you're going to see this whole, your body is solid. Your upper body, all the way down to a point. If you'll notice, especially at your side seam of your clothes, or even where your belly button is, that at waist level, everything's soft. But below the waist, you have a hardness again at the hip. And above the waist at the side, you have a hardness which is the bottom of the ribs. This is something you want to understand. And I always say taking a yoga class or a dance class while you're studying figure drawing is awesome, because it really brings you in tune with your own anatomy, and you will feel it in your drawings. I'm standing, by the way, while I draw, which is another way to feel energized and in your body when you draw. So as far as if you're touching your own body, you'll feel there's a hard bone here and here, right? All the way here and here. Top, we call hip bone, and then the high hip and the low hip. So what happens is you get this sort of shape in here. You could almost see it delineated just by her bikini. That shape is is all of the hard bone area in the body. So what happens is you have this shape that represents the high hip, low hip area. And then whenever you take a pose, that whole, because your pelvis bones don't move independently of one another. Like your left hip bone doesn't slide up and your lower one slides down. When this moves, the whole thing moves together. I'm going to sketch that over here. So here's a straight pelvis. Well, over here in a fancy pose, that sort of brick-shaped block, the whole thing just slides like this. And that's what we're going to see in our pose. I have the high hip and the low hip, and they've taken on an angle here. This sort of S-curve that I found represents the spine in the upper body, and I can use that to place, kind of like right at a right angle to that, I can place my pelvis block. That's what I call it, a block. What happens is you're going to use these blocks, and as you build them on the page very quickly, you're going to become a body. Like all of a sudden the body's almost there. You say, wow, it grew so quickly. Using these blocks helps you simplify some of the major shapes and information, and then rather than getting lost in every tiny detail, you can get the figure overall and then tweak and fine-tune. So I got the angle of this pelvis here. Now, a helpful way to also find out which side of the pelvis is going up, there's a few cheat sheet kind of rules that I can give you. So one of them is put yourself in the pose. So in this particular pose, if I'm her and I try to recreate the pose, you can't see me, thank goodness, but I'm creating the pose, I can totally feel how she's resting her weight on this leg. When you rest your weight on one leg and relax, that hip is the highest and the other one becomes the lowest. That's why this leg is bent and this leg is straight. So that's another way that I can tell that this hip is up and this side of the hip is down. Another way to know is you take an imaginary ruler. I always talk about these imaginary rulers. One of my first fine art teachers taught me this great tool that comes up in a million different ways. But as far as the hips go, remember I told you got those hip bones, right? You find the hard section of your body, and that, if you had a ruler between the two bones, but that ruler was endless. Imagine it was endless. Then suddenly it would become very obvious to you that how this angle looked. Right? It's easier to notice the angle of a long line than it is to recognize the angle of a short line. Well, it's much harder to gauge. But when it's long, it becomes very obvious. So that can also help you gauge the angle of that block. But here's the real excitement, because that block doesn't seem to tell you much of anything yet, does it? Upper body, rib cage, we're going to take the block the other way. Okay, upper body means from like the shoulders to the bottom of the rib cage, right? Shoulders to the bottom of the rib cage. It's slightly narrower at the bottom, wider at the top. But again, when it goes into action, I'm going to go this way. So for this particular pose, for example, up here, right, rib cage goes the opposite way. So if this is going this way, rib cage goes the opposite way. That's a rule for all action poses, and it's also the rule that brings all the dynamic movement into the pose. So what's just happened is, I'll just draw right on this photo to show that block. It's here, and yes, it has an angle. And it's really important to look at the bottom of the rib cage most of all to notice the angle of the pose, because shoulders, they're connected to this block that is the upper body, but shoulders can do their own thing. Ribs can't. If you want to move your rib cage, it either goes like this or it comes up. It doesn't go like this, right? Ribs don't move like that. So shoulders, though, look at that. So I could be standing straight, have my hand on my hip, and be doing something like this. So people always say, you know, pay attention to the shoulder angle, but it's the least reliable clue, so I wouldn't rely on it too heavily, although most of the time it moves with the upper body block. So here's my upper body and lower body block, but the crazy thing is that I didn't start with the head, and I usually do. So let me put an oval here. Notice that I'm not drawing with my fingers. One big thing that I bring up in my classes is that I think we're heavily influenced by writing. When we get into school as young people, you know, we start A, B, C, 1, 2, 3, and we start to think of pencils and lines and symbols, you know. B is for ball and all of that. When you're drawing, it's different, and that's why I have you drawing with the side of this pencil. Now, if you missed the beginning, I noticed more people clicking on. Don't worry, because I'm going to put up a replay for you. Yeah, so just stay in touch so I know you were here and I can get you a replay. And also on group chat, you can let me know where you are or any specific questions you have, and otherwise I'll just keep going along. So when you're using this pencil, you can sketch. A great exercise too is to practice sketching ellipses. See, I'm drawing with my whole arm, okay, in a light way. Working lightly gives you the freedom to never use an eraser and always get darker as you get more confident. Now I'm probably I'm starting dark because A, I want you to see from where you are at home, but also because I'm a little more confident. But if you start very lightly, you'll never have to use the eraser. Having the eraser around can really slow you down and have you keep striving for perfection. I'm not going for perfection. In fact, look, I'm going to smudge this up. I want the body that you're creating to emerge out of this smoky space, okay? I found the shape of this rib cage block, all of the hard portions of the upper body, all of the hard portions of the lower body. I've placed the head which was really right on top of that pure vertical that I started with. And then I remember I found that S-curve feeling in the beginning. Well, it's time to map the legs. From this high hip, what I do is I always plot the legs first as a straight core, and then I'll build up the anatomy, and I'll show you how I do that. But as far as heads go, it's 1, 2, 3, 4 for the upper body. That's a really useful proportion and super easy to remember. I can show you that. 1, 2, 3, 4. Not only is this just easy to remember and great, but it's not arbitrary. When you work with the mannequin to create garments on the dress form from your illustrations, you actually have design tape that goes through the bust level, the waist level, and the hip level. And if you look at your own body, which is always the best way to understand design drawing and design itself, you can notice the length of your head comes right down to bust level, more or less, depends, because bust can be higher or lower, wider or fuller, less full, depending on the person. But more or less, one head length brings you down to the fullest part of the bust, which then comes down, and the next hand reaches your belly button, waist level, and then that same proportion takes you down to your hip level or crotch. So these are actually landmarks of design, and not only that, they help you draw on the page. So my method, sketching the figure, will always help you translate onto the mannequin if you're taking your design and making it real. And I love that. Okay, so it's 4 heads for upper body, chin to bust. I can write that in for you. Chin level, bust level, to waist level, to hip, which I also call crotch level, because that's just where the 2 legs become the single upper body. Okay, and then it's 2 more heads to the knee, which is super easy to remember. 2 heads to knee, 2 heads to ankle. Okay, and then if there's any extra length for high heels, it's always going to add on to the below the ankle, right? So just imagine woman in flat foot, flat shoe, going to end right here, right? Put her in heels, the length is going to come down here. This particular model is on her flat foot, so I'm not going to add that extra length. Okay, so then, okay, I kind of drew on a core. I know that I see one leg overlapping the other, but when I'm just planning, I can use my X-ray vision and draw both. Okay, and what I'm going to start doing now is, remember I talked to you about practicing with spheres and ellipses and spheres? Well, I'm going to use those kinds of forms, which really take on a 3D feel on the page. I'm going to use them to build up the body. Now, this is the thrilling part. Coming into where the shoulders are and filling what you see with a round fullness. So remember, you can start nice and light, so you can change things, because as you're working, you're going to keep correcting yourself. It's okay. I don't expect anyone to get it right the very first time. And especially when you're drawing, you're always warming up. Just like a gymnast or anyone else, an artist is going to warm up. And your 5th drawing of the day is going to be 1,000,000 times more amazing than your first. But notice I'm using the side of my pencil, and it helps me build these body parts like quickly and yet sort of step by step. Like I build them not from the outside in by coming up with a perfect line for the arm, but actually from the inside out. I sort of started by mapping it with straight lines and then building on those straight lines with ellipses or just solid tone. Okay, I'm going to build in the neck a little bit too. Here now. Great. Okay, then got this upper body block. There's no bust here yet, so I'm going to fill in the bust as well with these spheres, and I usually think of them as sort of apple size. I usually say tennis ball size. You can always compare them to the shoulder size. Does it all usually pretty similar in size to the shoulder? Quick tidbit trick in drawing the arms after you've drawn them, if you want to double check how you've positioned them, look at this shape here and see it as a shape. in itself and compare the shape you've drawn to the shape in the photo or the model you're looking at. And that can really help you actually make corrections if you're way off, if you're a little off or way off. Do the same here. Just gonna take a little look at that. My free course, when you opt into my website, fashionillustrationtribe.com, actually has a free course, at least for now it does, called Everything But the Girl, and that's really about this. It's about seeing the space around the model. It can help you. It's amazing how we can not see what we see when we're drawing the model, and it's really good to have methods for double checking yourself to correct things in your drawing. Okay, so upper body. What I haven't gotten now is I got the width of the hips, but what happens in here? So this area, I always draw my rib cage block and my hip block separate. They're like totally different universes, different neighborhoods, because your rib cage and your hips, the only thing joining them is a little spine in between. All that stuff in between is soft and supple and flexible. And that's what all this is in here. So after I've got my hard body portions mapped out, I can blend the rest based on what I see. And the biggest mistake that people are making in fashion, look at, okay, I catch myself doing it, which is great because I complain when other people are doing it. One is only drawing what you see as frontal. So you draw the front of her body, and people are always leaving out this part right here because our mind processes and plays tricks on us. That portion right there is behind the front of the fashion look. So people leave it out. But if you do that, she's going to look painfully skinny. So I'm coming back here and I'm blending that in. Right? Big difference. Now let's stop beating up these poor fashion models and tearing their bodies apart, right? Okay. Now, so here's, and I got this beautiful curve. Let's do it. Now, there's nothing super skinny or super narrow about this model. People tend to do that because they see dynamics. In fashion, you'll always have, when there's an action pose, it looks like the waist is pinched, but it's not pinched. You have a wide hip and a wide rib cage. It's just that when they go like this, you get this dynamics in the waist. So being skinny is going to be a way of trying to communicate that, but it's really missing the truth. Okay? All right, so now we got to build up our legs. And I'm going to fill this in now so you can kind of see how the torso has come to life. All right? And now building the legs, thighs, always notice that you have your bone, your hard portions. I always say go back to your own body, touch your hip, knock on those bones so you can feel them as hard as you may have to knock. Find those bones and notice that the widest part of the hip is actually below that. So, but if you don't draw your hips wide enough, your hip bones, you won't be able to fit two legs onto them. So the width there actually becomes wider, a little bit wider down here. Oftentimes, depends on the model. And speaking personally, my body changes every few years, and all those things move to different places. But when building legs, work with these ellipses and notice they're wider at the top, getting narrower towards the knee. Okay, so working like this and getting darker as you feel more like secure. Okay, now wider at the top, narrower towards the knee, but the knee is just like the waist. It's an area where things change direction. It's not an area that's like pinched. I can't tell you how many people, right, they draw legs sort of like that. The knee is anything but that. It's not actually pinched. It's just an area where things change direction. It's the dynamics that people are trying to achieve. But the knee is actually large. It's like a grapefruit or something. So go nice and large, and then another long ellipse that's wider at the top and narrower at the bottom will take you to the ankle. And then the heel is a little sphere that you can, okay, good. So there's one leg. And see, after you've created a shape like that, you can come in with a line later if you want. I mean, that's a whole other class in my course. But to illustrate what I'm talking about, well, I feel like her upper thigh got longer than in the picture. Sorry. Okay. Then the other leg. What's happening there? It's funny because I did this demonstration last night for the scheduled event. I think it's on YouTube now. And I approached all these things in a slightly different order. So what I did last night was I really started with the head and the feet. Because the relationship of the head and the feet is essential. The head and the feet, if they're not placed properly, then she's always going to look like she's falling down no matter what you do in between. Okay? The head being centered over the feet means that you can put her hips way out here and she's still, I'm just going to draw a quick body over here for fun. Okay, do you see her? She still won't be falling if her feet are in the right place. Okay, but if her feet are in that, wow, that's actually wrong. That's okay. If I draw a wrong leg, I just come up with another one. Okay, but if her supporting foot isn't under her head, she'll always be tipping over. So here's her head. Her supporting foot's got to be right there, and it is. This changes slightly if her weight is distributed between her feet, then there's a little leeway there. But if she's really resting on one foot, which she is here, I know that because her other foot is like on tippy toes, it's like posed there. She's resting on that back leg. It better be right under her head. It's actually usually the inner ankle in a frontal pose that would be right under the head. So that foot is there, and that leg is here. And I can use, the image I'm working from to help me see that. And you know what I'm going to do? Because this leg is behind, I'm going to make it darker. I'm tossing out like a smorgasbord of all these different exercises to you. Another great exercise is always, whatever's behind, making it darker, because visually it will recede in space. Do you see what just happened here? That leg fell behind simply because it was darker. Great. So there's your body, and actually that's complete. And I do feel that she came out narrower than the original, so I'm going to tweak her around a little bit and build up her width. Now what happens? What happens if it's too narrow or too thick? What you do is you have real life proportion tools that you can use to tune in. So for example, if you need to check proportion, find comparative measurements. You can do this with your own fingers. For example, how wide is her hip? And how does that compare to her bust? What do you know? They happen to be identical. So good. That would help me see if there's anything I have to fix. Right? And then I could compare other measurements like, let me think, how wide something is compared to something else. Like I could use the length of the head. You can use this when you're building bodies a lot. Take the length of the head and compare it to different width measures. So head is this long. How many head lengths create the bust? 1 1/3 in this case. Good. So I'm double checking myself, and and I find that it's correct again. Then I know I'm really right, because sometimes you need to tweak what you've done. So what if I compare the length of the head to the distance from shoulder to hip? 1, 2, and a bit. Okay. 1, 2, and a bit. Okay. So anyway, how can I make things wider? I feel like I need a little more width. So let me I'm going to use my pure eyeball now. I think it's up here. I do. And the bust, actually, because I've expanded the rib, I'm going to move the bust out a little on each side. And once you've built an amazing figure like this that you love, now, yeah, this isn't your fashion illustration as far as clothes go, but you have completely trained your eye. You've trained your eye to see let me turn this so it's no longer on a diagonal for you to see how she's balanced and not falling. I am still a little bit bothered by her looking so skinny. Well, another thing that happens is the more you shade your figures, you'll always shed a lot of pounds, because what happens is something that looked flat starts to look rounded when it's shaded. So this is another important reason why you do not want to sketch your illustrations too skinny. If they're too skinny, they're always going to be, when you go and shade them to make some beautiful illustrations, they're going to look even skinnier, and you do reach a point where it becomes kind of painful. So knowing that even helps you draw wider, so that you know that when you shade, she's even going to look skinnier. So it's safe. It should be safe to draw wide. And I think I just found the final place where I'm going to add. I actually think I'm going to add here. Yeah, that's it for this particular pose and this particular model. And now that I'm just about done, I want to open the floor for questions. So please, if you have any questions or comments, let me know in the chat, because then I can address those. I mean, it could even be something different, like, well, how do you draw a pleated skirt? I could show you how to draw a pleated skirt on here, because we've got 20 more minutes. I might wrap it up sooner if the group stays small, but if anyone wants to chime in, you'd be more than welcome. That's the really fun part, is being in the live room. As these groups grow, it's going to be such a party. I'm so excited. All right, so so to finalize this, right, now we've got all this sketchy stuff. I'm actually going to smudge it up again, something I learned early on in school. You don't have to do it, but I find that when I'm exploring, having a soft and sort of messy space helps me feel like I can explore safely. So what I want to do to sort of finalize, this pencil, I told you it was woodless graphite. I told you how using the side of that helps me draw areas and not only lines. What I didn't tell you about this woodless graphite pencil is that this is a 6B. When you purchase pencils, you'll see letter codes on them, 2H. Anything that has an H on it, I will not recommend, not for anything in any of my classes. Primarily because H pencils or HB, they have a very light lead, stays sharp, remains sharp. But if you apply any pressure, it will actually dent your paper and leave like a ridge in it, which can be terrible later when you go to paint or add any kind of texture. You're not carving, you're drawing. You don't want to have lines scratched into your paper. So soft pencil won't do that. But also, B refers to softness. So like a typical school kind of pencil is usually a 2B. For art classes, it's great to have like a 9B, 6B, especially in the beginning, because they're super soft. They smudge as well if you want to get some like dramatic effects. And they also, you know, all those, if you look like Antonio Lopez or any of these great designers and illustrators, getting drama with your line, we call this line quality, you know, going from very thin to very thick, from light to dark, adds a lot of drama to your illustration. Well, now I'm going to pull out the blackness by pressing hard and looking for a few details on this bikini before I leave you. One I'm going to do is I'm going to try to fill in some black areas to represent the shape of her hairstyle, the size and shape of it. I'm going to use contour lines, which we'll discuss in another video, to sort of get the shapes of the edges of her hair. And also feel out the eyebrows. Remember that eyes are halfway down the head, so be careful not to put them too high up on her head, or it will kind of look like she doesn't have a brain. I always shade under the chin. It makes the face sort of pop forward. Look at that drama. Love it. Just a few more things. There's a little shadow here. You can squint, and it will totally help you see shadows if you squint. I see a strong shadow in here. If you squint, I see the navel. We already shaded that back leg. Oh, and then what I'm going to do is just go in and draw the garment, the thing you really wanted to illustrate, right? The fashion garment. So drawing in her bikini and noticing that line, we know it's straight, but it's not straight. It's quite curved on the mannequin. And the curves here and here. Whoops. I don't like to draw dark right away because I always catch myself making corrections. There's like some pleats here, and there are some pleats here. And then the upper body, same thing. I'm gonna look for the center line. And I know that's where her bikini dips the most, is on the center line. I'm really carefully gonna plot out those design details. And here, there's like a seam going through the apex of the bust, which is very common, used to shape the bust. And then we have these cool gathers or pleats going all into the center. So we actually got to, because everything was so dark, you can't really see those details too well. But if we just sculpted this lady, or what? Is she like carved out of wood or whatever? Yeah. I think it's challenging me a bit, is I keep feeling like it looks like she's falling, but honestly, I'm going to teach you one of my biggest secrets before we hang up. And are you sure you don't have any questions or comments? I'm not getting any, and I just want to check because it tells me to put in this special code. So let me just, please bear with me for one moment. So list all available comments, enter /?. Oh, it's a shortcut. I hope I'm not getting your comments. That's all I can say. Let me just put this Q&A button back on. Oh no. Have I been missing Q&A? Unbelievable. Well, this is why I'm doing this. I'm learning. If you have Q&A questions, I have a column on the right-hand side of the screen and I can see any of your questions. I'm going to show you some crazy magic last thing, so don't go anywhere, and then I'll wrap this up, okay? So here's my figure. Here's my photo, and I want to make sure that you're not looking at them angled. I want you to see them straight on. Hang on. I hope you don't get car sick. Okay. Because straight on is where you can tell if she's falling or not. Now, I feel like she's falling towards the right. Now, that's probably because I have the camera and I'm sort of sitting at a funny angle. All right, but I'm going to show you how you can fix something like that while you're learning and building. I'm going to show you a great fix, because oftentimes people say, oh gosh, I just stink at this, and they give up. Don't give up. Two things you can do. I don't know how I did it, but I really think it's because I'm kind of leaning in while I draw, and usually as a rule, I always draw, I don't know if you can see, I always say this, listen carefully. If you're going to take a photograph, you're going to take a camera, and what are you going to do? Are you going to stand here and take a picture like that, sideways? No. Take the camera, you put it straight on your face, and you aim squarely at what you're photographing. When you draw, you do the same thing. Whatever you're drawing, look at it squarely. Aim right at it. When you look straight out, you should see exactly what you're drawing, because then you can use the plumb line, the pure vertical, the balance line. If you're drawing sideways, or as many people do, how many people turn their paper diagonal before they start to write? I can't tell you how many people come to drawing class trying to draw that way. I cannot draw that way. There's too many mental processes that have to go on for me to be able to draw on a diagonal piece of paper. Everything's got to be square on, and it really helps all of these guidelines flow. It makes it so easy. So I'm drawing sideways, and I ended up with a girl who's falling slightly, because I feel like, okay, if here's her head, okay, it should pass through just to the left of her navel, right through that knee and the ankle. Okay, is it passing to the right of her navel? No. Her navel, yeah. Okay, let me try this again. Comparing. Okay, it's going right through her navel. So her knees should be like here. Now, I can redraw them, and I love that. I always say to my students, oh, I drew 5 legs on this girl before I got her right. You can do it by redrawing the legs and shifting things. Let me show you one more little tweak. So hang on, let me get my scissors. And they are right here. Another thing you could do, because let's say I'm going to use this again and again by tracing over, you can actually, but this requires you to hinge. I'm going to go cut to the hip. I'm going to cut to the hip again. This side. And sort of play with, actually I'm just going to, maybe I'll just cut the whole thing off. Just by slightly moving, I've corrected my pose. I think that's so awesome. Okay, like to know that, like let's say you're doing what's called an undersketch, which means you are creating the body first and then drawing the figure over that. And actually there's even another great thing I can do to it, which is I'm just going to break it. And let me correct. Okay, actually I really wanted those knees to be like under her. And sometimes you do something like that and you realize what was off is so easily fixed. And then you just blend a little bit with your pencil. So, whoa, 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 come back. Right? So, yeah, maybe that's not how you want to do your whole career, Me neither, but having that flexibility to know that you can do that, to know that you can correct yourself, or to realize that it wasn't as off as you thought it was, there's a great gift to that. And sometimes if there's something I don't want to keep, I'll do like little tick marks to remind myself. And then what I can do is I can come with a fresh piece of paper right over, and I've got this body built, and then I can start dressing her. So always remember to try to go for a piece that you can, garment that you can dress again and again and again. I thank you for joining me. Since it's small class, I'm going to cut it shorter, but I'm so looking forward to having these classes where we're asking questions, specific questions like, Laura, I've been struggling with this, it's not working. My whole joy is to help you overcome all the blocks that get in the way of you expressing yourself in a way that you can be really happy with. I appreciate you coming by tonight. On www.fashionillustrationtribe.com, you can see my private classes where you can access all of the videos in a specific order, where I will, you will constantly have invitations to comment, to ask questions, and to share with the group so that the group can interact and give each other feedback. And so much. The course is planned. They're all planned because I've been doing this for many years. I know where I'm aiming with each assignment. The plan is to bring out your unique voice and have you expressing yourself and designing groups and sharing them. I'm so excited to see you there. So I hope you'll subscribe at fashionillustrationtribe.com so I can keep you posted for events like this or new blog posts, mini courses or special events that come up. And I also hope you'll check out my book, which has been reviewed by the Yale University Library Journals. I'm very, very happy for that news. It's called The Language of Fashion Design, published on Rockport this year. And I'm looking to do more speaking events, sharing the process of writing that book. And looking forward to writing more books. This was really a mainstream, middle of the road excursion into writing my book, and I look forward to starting to be able to write about all different aspects of my fashion journey. And more than anything, I want to get to know you guys and what you need, what I can help you with, so I can bring you more great content on Fashion Illustration Tribe. Thanks for joining me. I'll see you soon. Don't stop creating and sharing your message. Thank you.